"You don't need this money anymore," my daughter said, and emptied my account. I laughed and, well, that's getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and explain how I found myself sitting across from my only daughter, Rebecca, as she informed me that she'd transferred the entirety of my retirement savings into her own accounts for safekeeping. My name is Harold Sullivan. I'm 73 years old, a retired high school history teacher from Millfield, Ohio, a small town where I've lived my entire life. I taught for 45 years at the same school, shaping the minds of generations of teenagers, some of whom now have grandchildren of their own. I was never going to be rich on a teacher's salary, but I was careful with money, lived modestly and managed to save a respectable nest egg of just over $800,000 for my retirement. My wife, Eleanor, passed away 5 years ago after 47 years of marriage. We had one child, Rebecca, now 46, who lives in Columbus with her husband Garrett and their twin boys, who recently left for college. Since Eleanor's death, I've lived alone in the small two-bedroom house we bought when we first married. It's paid off, comfortable, filled with memories and perfectly suitable for a widower like myself. Or so I thought. The trouble began 3 months ago when I slipped on some ice while retrieving my mail. Nothing serious, a sprained wrist and some bruising, but enough to alarm Rebecca when I mentioned it during our weekly phone call. "Dad, you can't live alone anymore," she declared, with the absolute certainty that had characterized her since childhood. "What if you'd broken your hip? You could have lain there for hours." "I have neighbors, Becky," I said, using the nickname she'd outgrown, but I still employed when I wanted to annoy her. Mrs. Abernathy saw me fall and came right over. I was fine. Mrs. Abernathy is 85 herself, that's hardly reassuring. What followed was a campaign of increasing intensity to convince me to sell my house and move into an assisted living facility. When I resisted, the suggestions evolved into demands. When demands didn't work, Rebecca shifted tactics. She began showing up unannounced, ostensibly to help around the house. She'd reorganize my kitchen cabinets without asking, throw away perfectly good clothes she deemed too worn. And once, I caught her photographing the contents of my medicine cabinet. "What are you doing?" I asked, finding her with her phone held up to my modest collection of prescription medications. "Just making sure you're taking everything properly," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Mum always said you were terrible about remembering your pills." It was true that Eleanor had managed our healthcare with military precision, but I'd adapted since her passing. My pill organizer was filled every Sunday evening, my doctor's appointments marked clearly on my kitchen calendar, and despite Rebecca's implications, my mind was as sharp as ever. But the final straw came last month when I received a call from the local bank, where I'd been a customer for decades. "Mr. Sullivan, we're calling to confirm your recent authorization for your daughter to access your accounts," said Martha, the branch manager who'd known me for 20 years. "I never authorized that," I said, my blood running cold. There was a pause. "Well, we have the paperwork here with your signature. She came in yesterday." "I need to come see this paperwork," I said. "And in the meantime, please revoke that access immediately." At the bank, Martha showed me the form with what appeared to be my signature. It was close, very close, but not mine. Rebecca had forged it, presumably from the numerous birthday cards and documents I'd signed over the years. "I'm sorry, Harold," Martha said, clearly embarrassed. "She's so convincing. Said you weren't well and needed help managing your finances." "Do I look unwell to you, Martha?" I asked the woman who'd seen me every month for 2 decades. She shook her head. "No, but she had documents from some doctor saying you were experiencing cognitive decline. We should have called you directly to confirm." "What doctor? I've never been diagnosed with any cognitive issues." Martha couldn't share the documents with me due to bank policy, but she did revoke Rebecca's access and placed a security note on my accounts requiring in-person verification. For any significant changes, I left the bank shaken but resolute. I needed to confront Rebecca, but first I wanted to understand the full scope of what she was attempting, so I called my longtime physician, Dr. Powell. "Harold, I haven't written any such evaluation," he said, sounding concerned after I explained the situation. "And your last checkup showed you in excellent health, mentally and physically, for a man your age." "Then who wrote this report?" she showed the bank. "I don't know, but it wasn't me, and it's potentially fraud. Would you like me to write a counter-assessment clarifying your cognitive status? I took him up on his offer and left his office with an official letter stating I was of sound mind and fully capable of managing my own affairs. Armed with this document, I invited Rebecca to lunch at Peterson's, the nicest restaurant in Millfield. A public setting seemed prudent for what promised to be a difficult conversation. She arrived looking harried but well-dressed in the expensive tailored clothes she preferred. As a senior marketing executive for a national retail chain, appearance was important to her. "Dad, I can't stay long. I have a conference call at 3. "This won't take long," I said, keeping my voice casual. "How are the boys liking college?" We made small talk through our appetizers, though I noticed she kept checking her phone, clearly impatient to leave. When our main courses arrived, I decided it was time. "Rebecca, why did you forge my signature to gain access to my bank accounts?" Her fork clattered against her plate. "What? I didn't. Please don't lie to me." Martha at the bank showed me the form. "It's a good forgery, but not perfect." A flush crept up her neck. "You're being dramatic, Dad. I was just trying to help. You've been so forgetful lately, and I was worried about your finances." "What specific instances of forgetfulness have concerned you?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Lots of little things. You can never remember what we talked about on our last call. You repeat stories." "I repeat stories because you never listened the first time," I said calmly. "You're always on your phone." Her eyes narrowed. "This is exactly what I mean. You're becoming bitter and paranoid. It's not your fault. It's just age." "Dr. Powell disagrees," I said, sliding the letter across the table. "He's certified that I'm fully competent and not suffering from any cognitive impairment." She barely glanced at it. "Powell is ancient himself. What does he know?" "I consulted with a specialist in Columbus." "A specialist who's never met me?" "That's hardly ethical medical practice." She sighed dramatically. "Dad, I'm trying to protect you. The house is too much for you to manage. Your investments aren't performing as well as they could. I'm just looking out for your best interests. By committing fraud." Her face hardened. "You know what? I've had enough of this. I've already moved your money to secure accounts I've set up. You don't need this money anymore. The house will sell, and you'll be comfortable in Sunny Pines." Sunny Pines was the most expensive assisted living facility in central Ohio, a place that resembled a luxury hotel more than a care center. "You've what?" I kept my voice steady, though my heart was pounding. "Transferred your funds." "For safekeeping." She met my eyes defiantly. "The checks you write are about to start bouncing, Dad. You need me now." I stared at my daughter, this stranger wearing Rebecca's face, and something shifted inside me. In that moment, I saw her clearly, not as my little girl, but as the manipulative, entitled woman she'd become. And I knew exactly what I needed to do. I laughed, not a chuckle or a nervous titter, but a full, deep laugh that turned heads at nearby tables. Rebecca looked startled, then annoyed. "What's so funny? This is serious, Dad." "Oh, I know it is," I said, regaining my composure. "Embezzlement and elder abuse usually are." Her face paled. "What are you talking about?" I took a sip of water. "Rebecca, did you really think a history teacher who specialized in research wouldn't have backup plans, that I'd leave my entire financial security in one place where you could access it?" She blinked rapidly. "The account had over $800,000. "Yes, it did, and I'll be pressing charges for every penny of it, unless of course it's returned within 24 hours in full." "You wouldn't dare," she hissed. "I'm your daughter, your only child, which makes this betrayal all the more painful," I said, my voice finally betraying some emotion. "But you've left me no choice." "No one will believe you," she said, but uncertainty had crept into her voice. "They'll see a confused old man." I removed my phone from my pocket and placed it on the table. "This entire conversation has been recorded, as was our meeting last week when you first suggested you safeguard my money." Her eyes widened. "Ohio was a one-party consent state for recordings, and we both knew it. Additionally," I continued, "I've already filed a police report about the forgery, although I declined to press charges at that time. I've also contacted Adult Protective Services about the financial exploitation. They're very interested in..." The fake cognitive assessment you somehow procured. Rebecca's confident facade crumbled. Dad, please, you don't understand. We're underwater on the house, Garrett's business is failing, and the boys' tuition— Oh, there it was, the real reason. So you decided to steal from me rather than ask for help. I shook my head. What happened to you, Rebecca? Your mother and I didn't raise you this way. Tears welled in her eyes, genuine ones, I thought. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. You could have talked to me, been honest. Would you have helped? Of course I would have. You're my daughter, but now— I sighed heavily. Now there's a police report and a bank fraud investigation and potentially criminal charges. Her tears fell freely now. What can I do? Please, Dad. Tell me how to fix this. I pushed a folded document across the table. This is a cashier's check for $50,000. A gift from me to you, properly documented and tax compliant. It should help with the boys' tuition and give you breathing room to figure out your finances. She stared at the check, confusion replacing fear. But I don't understand. Return every penny you took from my accounts by noon tomorrow. Provide me with documentation from this specialist who diagnosed me without meeting me, so my lawyer can address that situation. And finally, you'll attend financial counseling. I've already arranged and paid for 6 sessions. That's it? You're just giving me money? After what I tried to do, I'm giving you one chance to make this right, Rebecca. One. Because despite everything, you're still my daughter, and I believe people can change when properly motivated. I leaned forward. But make no mistake, if my money isn't returned in full by noon tomorrow, I will press every possible charge. I will testify against you, and I will win. She took the check with trembling fingers. The money will be back tomorrow. I promise. Good, and Rebecca, don't ever try something like this again. I may be old, but I'm not helpless, and I'm certainly not stupid. The money was returned by 9 a.m. the next day, all $823,167.82 of it. Rebecca also forwarded me emails from a Dr. Chambers in Columbus, who'd written an assessment based solely on her description of my supposed symptoms. I passed these along to my newly retained attorney, who assured me that Dr. Chambers would be receiving some unwelcome attention from the state medical board. But the most surprising development came 3 days later, when Rebecca and Garrett appeared. On my doorstep, looking chastened. We've put our house on the market, Garrett said without preamble. We're downsizing to something we can actually afford. And I've taken a demotion at work, Rebecca added. Less travel, less stress, less pay, but I'll be home more. I invited them in, curious about this apparent transformation. Over coffee, they laid out the full extent of their financial troubles. Years of living beyond their means had left them with crushing debt. The boys' college funds had been depleted for household expenses long before they graduated high school. Garrett's construction business had been losing money for years, but they'd kept up appearances by refinancing their house repeatedly. We were drowning, Rebecca admitted. But that's no excuse for what I tried to do to you. I've been so ashamed. I can hardly look at myself in the mirror. The financial counselor you arranged has been a wake-up call, Garrett added. We've been living in denial for years. I studied my daughter's face, seeing real remorse there. It won't be easy rebuilding from this. We know, she said quietly, but we're committed to doing it the right way this time. And the boys? Have you told them? Rebecca nodded. They're actually being surprisingly mature about it. Michael has already arranged a work-study program, and Jason is applying for scholarships for next semester. We talked for hours that day, really talked in a way we hadn't in years. By the time they left, something had shifted between us. The trust wasn't fully restored, that would take time, but a foundation for rebuilding had been laid. Over the following months, I watched with cautious optimism as Rebecca and Garrett followed through on their promises. They sold their 4,500-square-foot house and moved into a modest 3-bedroom ranch. Garrett closed his failing business and took a job with a larger construction firm. Rebecca threw herself into her new role, which allowed her to be home for dinner most nights. As for me, I took steps to protect myself from any future helpfulness. I set up a revocable trust with clear directives about my care and finances. I appointed Jim Peterson, my oldest friend and a retired judge, as successor trustee should I ever become incapacitated. I also arranged for regular cognitive assessments with a respected geriatric specialist, creating a formal record of my mental acuity. But more importantly, I found a new passion. Through my attorney, I learned about the prevalence of elder financial abuse, often perpetrated by family members. Using my teaching background and personal experience, I began volunteering with a senior advocacy group, giving presentations at retirement communities and senior centers about financial protection. 6 months after our confrontation at Peterson's restaurant, Rebecca joined me for one of these presentations. She stood before a room of seniors and told her side of the story, how financial desperation had led her to betray her own father, and the lessons she'd learned since. "I almost destroyed my relationship with the most important man in my life," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And for what? Money that wasn't mine. Money that represented his lifetime of hard work and careful planning." After the presentation, as we walked to our cars, Rebecca linked her arm through mine. "I'm still so ashamed," she admitted. "Facing those people today, telling them what I almost did to you." "Shame has its place," I replied. "It's how we know we've violated our own values. But you're making amends, Becky. Real ones." She smiled at the nickname rather than bristling as she once would have. "You know what's ironic? If I'd just been honest about our financial problems from the beginning, we wouldn't have spiraled so far down. Pride is expensive. So is dishonesty," I added. "But wisdom is priceless. And it sounds like you've gained some." We reached her car, a modest sedan that had replaced her luxury SUV. "Dad," she said hesitantly, "would you come for dinner? On Sunday? The boys will be home from college and they've been asking to see you." "I'd like that," I said, "very much." As I watched her drive away, I reflected on the strange journey we'd been through. When she told me she'd emptied my accounts, I'd laughed. Not from humor, but from the shock of finally seeing the truth about my daughter and our relationship. That moment of clarity had been painful, but necessary, forcing both of us to confront uncomfortable realities. "You don't need this money anymore," she'd said, attempting to take control of my life and assets. But what she hadn't understood then, and perhaps was beginning to grasp now, was that money had never been what I valued most. What I'd always needed, was respect, honesty, connection. And ironically, by trying to take everything from me, Rebecca had set in motion a chain of events that might ultimately give me back what mattered most. My daughter, humbled but wiser, finding her way back to the values her mother and I had tried to instill, that was worth more than any bank account. As I drove home to my small, comfortable house, I thought about Eleanor. She would have been heartbroken by Rebecca's actions, but heartened by the redemption that followed. "People can surprise you," she used to say, "sometimes in terrible ways, but sometimes in wonderful ones too." At 73, I'd experienced my share of both kinds of surprises. But I'd learned that it wasn't the surprises themselves that mattered most. It was how you responded to them, with fear or courage, with bitterness or wisdom, with surrender or resolve. "You don't need this money anymore," my daughter had said, attempting to take my financial independence. I'd laughed then, recognizing the absurdity of her assumption, and I could smile now, knowing that while she'd been wrong about the money, she'd inadvertently led us both to something we needed far more: truth, reconciliation, and the chance to rebuild what had been broken. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's standing firm in your own worth, it's holding others accountable while still offering them a path to redemption. It's recognizing that even the deepest betrayals can, with time and genuine effort, lead to healing. And sometimes, against all odds, they can even lead to something better than what was lost. A year passed since that fateful confrontation at Peterson's restaurant. My relationship with Rebecca had evolved into something I wouldn't have thought possible in the dark days when I discovered her betrayal. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, old habits that needed breaking, trust that continued to need rebuilding, but it was genuine in a way it hadn't been for decades. The boys, Michael and Jason, now sophomores in college, had initially been mortified when they learned what their mother had attempted to do. They'd called me separately, each apologizing profusely, as though they bore some responsibility for their parents' actions. "Grandpa, I had no idea things were that bad at home," Michael had said, his voice cracking. "Mom and Dad always acted like everything was fine. We had no clue they were struggling financially." "That's not your burden to bear," I'd assured him. "Your job is to focus on your education." Jason, always the more emotional of the twins, had actually driven 3 hours from his campus to see me in person. "I keep thinking about what would have happened if you hadn't caught Mom," he'd said, sitting in my living room, eyes red-rimmed. "She could have gone to prison. Our family would have been destroyed." I'd patted his shoulder. "But I did catch her, and she made the right choice in the end. That's what matters now." Both boys had taken summer jobs to help with expenses, refusing the additional money I'd offered. "We need to do this ourselves, Grandpa," Michael had insisted. "It's time we grew up about money." Their maturity made me proud. Perhaps some good had come from this difficult chapter after all. Today was Sunday, exactly 1 year since I'd confronted Rebecca. I was preparing to drive to Columbus for a special dinner at her new home, the modest ranch house that had replaced their ostentatious mini-mansion. It was a significant date for us both, though we hadn't explicitly acknowledged it as... I adjusted my tie in the mirror. Eleanor had always insisted on proper dress for Sunday dinners. My phone rang. It was Jim Peterson, my oldest friend and the successor trustee of my revocable trust. "Harold, you'll never guess who I ran into at the golf club yesterday," he said without preamble. "The Pope? Bigfoot? Don't keep me in suspense, Jim." He chuckled. "Dr. Chambers, our friend from Columbus who wrote that bogus cognitive assessment for Rebecca." My hand tightened on the phone. "What happened to him?" "Last I heard, the medical board was reviewing his case. 3-month suspension of his license and mandatory ethics training," Jim reported. "He approached me, if you can believe it, recognized me from the hearing, wanted me to tell you he's sorry." "Did he now?" I sat on the edge of my bed. "A bit late for that." That's what I told him. Know what he said? That your daughter was very convincing, that she cried in his office about her poor, declining father, who was too proud to admit he needed help. I sighed. That sounded like Rebecca, at least the Rebecca of a year ago. She'd always been able to turn on the waterworks when needed, even as a child. "Well, he made his choice," I said, "and he faced the consequences, just like Rebecca," Jim noted. "How is that going, by the way? You never really talk about it." I considered the question. "It's evolving. Better than I would have expected. She's different now." "People don't change, Harold," Jim said skeptically. "Not really." "Maybe not fundamentally," I conceded, "but priorities can shift. Perspectives can broaden. Rebecca's always been driven and resourceful. Those traits just got channeled in the wrong direction for a while." After finishing my conversation with Jim, I completed my preparations and began the hour-long drive to Columbus. The spring landscape of Ohio rolled past my window. Farms awakening from winter dormancy, new developments sprouting where cornfields had once stood. The eternal cycle of growth and change that had always fascinated me as a history teacher. Thought about Jim's skepticism regarding Rebecca's transformation. Was I being naive? Had I let my desire for reconciliation cloud my judgment? It was possible. But I'd also seen the consistent effort she'd made over the past year, the financial counseling sessions she'd not only attended but embraced, the downsizing of their lifestyle, the genuine remorse she continued to express. Most convincingly, she'd respected my financial boundaries completely. Not once had she asked for additional money beyond the initial $50,000 I'd provided, even when I knew they were struggling to adjust to their reduced income. That, more than anything, told me something had truly shifted. I arrived at Rebecca and Garrett's new home just before 5. It was a tidy ranch-style house in an older established neighborhood, nothing like the sprawling new development where they'd previously lived. The lawn was neatly maintained, but the landscaping was simple compared to the elaborate professional gardening they'd once employed. Rebecca greeted me at the door with a warm hug. "Right on time as always, Dad. Come in. Everyone's already here." "Everyone?" I asked, surprised. I'd expected just the immediate family. She smiled mysteriously. "You'll see." I followed her into the living room and stopped short. Beyond Garrett and the twins, who I'd expected, sat three elderly individuals I recognized immediately: Herb and Mabel Johnston, and Betty Wilcox, all members of my senior advocacy group. They rose when I entered, smiling. "What's this?" I asked, genuinely confused. "Surprise, Grandpa," Jason said, coming forward to embrace me. "It's not just dinner, it's a celebration." Michael joined his brother. "We wanted to mark the 1-year anniversary, not of, the bad stuff, but of what came after, the good stuff." I was touched but still puzzled. "And my friends from the advocacy group?" Betty stepped forward. "We're here because we have news, Harold. Our grant application was approved. The Financial Safety for Seniors program is funded for the next 3 years." I felt my heart leap. This was a project I'd been working on for months, a comprehensive educational initiative to help seniors protect themselves from financial exploitation, with resources, workshops, and one-on-one counseling. We'd applied for a substantial grant from a national foundation, but had been told our chances were slim. That's wonderful news," I managed, feeling overwhelmed. "It gets better," Herb added. "They're not just funding it here in Ohio. They want to use it as a pilot program for national implementation. Your curriculum, Harold, your materials." I sank into the nearest chair, stunned. How did this happen? "Last we heard, they were leaning toward the California proposal." Rebecca cleared her throat. "That might be my fault, or credit, depending on how you look at it." I turned to her, questioning. "I reached out to the foundation," she admitted. "Used some of my marketing connections to get a meeting with their director. I told them our story, my story, and how your program could have prevented someone like me from making the terrible mistake I nearly made." "You did that?" I was astonished. Rebecca had been reluctant to share our experience widely, understandably. Embarrassed by her actions, she nodded. "It was time to own my mistakes completely. If our story can help other families avoid the same pitfalls, then something good can come from it." Garrett stepped forward. "We've also been talking to our lawyer about something else." He looked at Rebecca, who nodded encouragingly. "We'd like to formalize a financial arrangement with you, Harold. A proper loan with reasonable interest to repay the $50,000 you gave us last year." "That was a gift," I protested. "I never expected repayment." "We know," Rebecca said, "but we want to do this. It's important to us, to our recovery and to teaching the boys about financial responsibility. We've drawn up terms that work within our budget. 5 years, monthly payments, fair interest, like any other legitimate loan." I was speechless. This wasn't the entitled daughter who had tried to seize control of my finances a year ago. This was a woman taking responsibility, making amends, finding her way back to the values Eleanor and I had tried to instill. "Well," I said finally, "I suppose we can discuss the terms after dinner." "Speaking of which," Garrett announced, "the roast should be ready. Shall we move to the dining room?" The meal was delicious, a far cry from the elaborate catered affairs they'd once hosted, but prepared with care and served on Eleanor's china, which Rebecca had brought out for the occasion. The conversation flowed easily, from the twins' college experiences to the plans for the senior financial safety program to Garrett's new position at the construction firm, where he'd recently been promoted to project manager. As we enjoyed dessert, a homemade apple pie that Rebecca had baked using her grandmother's recipe, I looked around the table and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Not just for the obvious resolution of our family crisis, but for the unexpected gifts that had emerged from it. My new purpose with the advocacy group, the boys' accelerated journey to adulthood, and most surprisingly, the authentic relationship I now had with my daughter. After our guest departed and the twins retreated to their old rooms, now much more modestly furnished, Rebecca joined me on the back patio. The April evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of newly bloomed flowers from the small garden she'd planted. "A year ago today," she said softly, "I thought my life was over. When you confronted me at Peterson's, I was sure you'd press charges, that I'd lose my job, maybe go to jail, that the boys would never forgive me." "I considered it," I admitted. "For about 5 minutes," she smiled ruefully. "I would have deserved it. Perhaps, but what would it have accomplished? More destruction? More pain?" I shook my head. "I needed you to face consequences, Rebecca. but not to be destroyed by them. You know what I've realized this past year? I spent so much of my life focusing on appearances. The right house, the right car, the right schools for the boys. I was so worried about what other people thought that I lost sight of what actually mattered. She looked at me directly. I almost sacrificed my relationship with my father for the sake of maintaining a lifestyle we couldn't afford. Why didn't you just ask me for help? It was a question I'd posed before, but I'd never received a complete answer. She was quiet. For a moment, pride partly, but also I'd convinced myself you wouldn't understand, that you'd judge us for our financial mistakes. You've always been so careful with money, so responsible. I was ashamed to admit how badly we'd mismanaged things. I'm your father, Rebecca. Judgment is the last thing I would have offered. I know that now. She reached over and took my hand. Mom would be so disappointed in what I tried to do. Perhaps initially, I acknowledged, but she would be proud of how you've handled yourself since. Eleanor always believed in redemption, in second chances. Do you remember what she used to say? It's not the mistake that defines you, but what you do after you make it. I smiled, hearing Eleanor's voice in my mind. She was a wise woman. Your mother. I miss her, Rebecca said simply, especially now. She would have known how to help us through this from the beginning. She is helping us, I said. Through the values she instilled, the love she gave, the example she set. She's still very much a part of who we are. We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Finally, Rebecca spoke again. I've been offered a promotion at work, she said. Senior Vice President of Marketing. More money, more responsibility. That's wonderful, I said cautiously. Isn't it? She nodded. It is. But I turned it down. I raised my eyebrows in surprise. The old Rebecca would have jumped at such an opportunity. The position involves extensive travel, at least 2 weeks out of every month. I've already missed too much time with the family, Dad. The boys will graduate in 2 years. Garrett and I are finally communicating properly. And you... She squeezed my hand. You won't be around forever. I don't want to waste any more time chasing status at the expense of what really matters. I felt a lump form in my throat. I'm proud of you, Becky. Your mother would be too. Later that night, as I drove back to Millfield under a canopy of stars, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. When Rebecca had told me she'd emptied my accounts, I'd laughed, a reaction born of shock and the sudden clarity of seeing our relationship for what it had become. That painful moment of truth had been necessary, forcing us both to confront realities we'd long avoided. In the months that followed, we'd rebuilt not just trust, but understanding, not just connection, but respect. We'd found our way back to the core values that mattered, honesty, integrity, responsibility, and in doing so had created something new and authentic between us. You don't need this money anymore, she'd said, attempting to take control of my life and assets. The irony wasn't lost on me that her failed attempt at financial exploitation had led to my new purpose, helping other seniors protect themselves from similar situations. The program that would now be implemented nationwide might prevent countless families from experiencing the trauma we'd endured. From Rebecca's worst mistake had emerged my most meaningful work. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Mrs. Abernathy's lights still on next door. She was 86 now, still fiercely independent, still checking on me after my falls. I made a mental note to bring her some of the apple pie Rebecca had insisted I take home. Inside my modest house, I hung up my coat and moved through the familiar rooms, touching the furniture Eleanor had selected, the photographs of our life together, the books we'd read and discussed over decades of marriage. This home contained not just possessions, but memories, layers upon layers of a life well lived. Rebecca had once seen this place as inadequate, something to be sold off so I could be tucked away in a facility. Now she understood what I'd known. All along, that value isn't measured in square footage or property assessments, but in the meaning we create within the spaces we inhabit. At 73, I had no illusions about immortality. I knew my time was limited, though hopefully still, measured in decades rather than years. But I took comfort in knowing that when I did eventually leave this world, I would be leaving behind more than just material possessions. I would be leaving a legacy of values, now renewed in my daughter and grandsons. I would be leaving work that might protect vulnerable seniors across the country. And I would be leaving the example of how one moment of moral courage, the refusal to be victimized, coupled with the grace to offer redemption, could transform not just my own life, but the lives of those I loved most. "You don't need this money anymore," my daughter had said, attempting to take my financial independence. I had laughed then, recognizing the absurdity of her assumption, and I could smile now, knowing that while she'd been wrong about the money, she'd inadvertently led us both to something we needed far more: truth, reconciliation, and the chance to rebuild what had been broken. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's standing firm in your own worth. It's holding others accountable while still offering them a path to redemption. It's recognizing that even the deepest betrayals can, with time and genuine effort, lead to healing. And sometimes, against all odds, they can even lead to something better than what was lost. 3 years later, I stood at a podium in Washington, D.C., looking out at the gathered audience of policymakers, senior advocates, and financial industry representatives. At 76, I was older than many in the room, but I felt energized by the purpose that had defined my retirement years. The Financial Safety for Seniors program has now been implemented in 43 states, I announced, unable to keep the pride from my voice. In the past 3 years, we've reached over 200,000 seniors with workshops, resources, and direct counseling. And the data shows a 17% reduction in reported cases of elder financial abuse in communities where our program operates. Applause filled the conference room. From my vantage point, I could see Rebecca seated in the front row, beaming. Now 49, she had taken a year's leave of absence from her job to help establish the program nationally, leveraging her marketing expertise to create compelling materials that resonated with seniors from all walks of life. But statistics only tell part of the story, I continued. Behind every number is a real person, a senior who maintained their independence and dignity, a family that avoided the trauma of financial exploitation, a relationship that remained intact rather than being destroyed by betrayal. I paused, making eye contact with various audience members. I know the devastating impact of elder financial abuse, not just as an educator, not just as an advocate, but as a survivor. 3 years ago, my own daughter attempted to take control of my finances under the guise of helping me. A murmur went through the audience. Although Rebecca and I had shared our story in smaller settings, this was the first time we'd brought it to a national platform. But our story didn't end there, and I'd like to invite that same daughter to join me now, to share her perspective on how families can recover from such breaches of trust and how we can work together to create a culture where elder financial exploitation becomes unthinkable. Rebecca rose and walked to the podium. We embraced briefly before she took my place. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion I could see in her eyes. "As you've heard, I'm the daughter who nearly committed a crime against my own father. I'm not proud of that fact, but I no longer hide from it either. It's part of my story, our story, and sharing it honestly has become part of my amends." For the next 20 minutes, Rebecca spoke candidly about the financial pressures, misplaced priorities, and rationalization that had led her to consider stealing from me. She described the shame of being caught, the fear of legal consequences, and the painful process of rebuilding trust with her father and her sons. "What my father offered me wasn't just forgiveness," she concluded. "He offered accountability paired with compassion, consequences paired with opportunity. He held me responsible for my actions while still believing in my capacity to change. And in doing so, he not only salvaged our relationship, but helped transform me into a better person than I was before." As Rebecca rejoined me at the podium for a Q&A session, I felt a sense of completion that transcended anything I could have imagined when this journey began. The betrayal that might have permanently fractured our family had instead strengthened it. The violation that might have left me bitter had instead given me purpose. Later that evening, as we walked along the National Mall, the monuments illuminated. Against the night sky, Rebecca linked her arm through mine. You know, Dad, I've been thinking a lot about something Mom used to say. She said many wise things. Which one in particular? She would tell me, the hardest lessons are often the most valuable. I never really understood that until these past few years. I nodded. Eleanor had a way of distilling complex truths into simple statements. I wish she could see us now, Rebecca said wistfully. See what we've built from the wreckage I created. I think she does see, I replied, and I think she always knew we'd find our way back to what matters. We stopped at the Lincoln Memorial, climbing the steps slowly in deference to my aging knees. At the top, we turned to look out over the reflecting pool toward the Washington Monument. The city spread out before us in a tapestry of lights. I never thanked you properly, Rebecca said suddenly. For what? For laughing. I looked at her, puzzled. That day at Peterson's when I told you I'd taken your money, you laughed. It was the last reaction I expected, and it completely threw me off balance. I smiled at the memory. It wasn't planned, it was just the absurdity of the moment struck me. My own daughter, thinking she could outsmart her old history teacher father. It was the first time I realized I might have underestimated you, she admitted. That laughter was the beginning of everything that followed. Sometimes, when faced with the unthinkable, laughter is the only sane response, I said. It's a way of saying, this will not defeat me. Rebecca squeezed my arm. Well, it changed everything. If you had reacted with anger or hurt, which you had every right to do, I'm not sure I would have seen myself clearly. Your laughter made me step outside myself for a moment and see how ridiculous, how shameful my behavior truly was. We began our descent from the memorial, moving carefully on the steps. You know, I said, there's something I've never told you about that day. When you said, you don't need this money anymore, and I realized what you'd done, I had this moment of absolute clarity. I saw our whole relationship laid bare, all the patterns, all the assumptions, all the things left unsaid over the years. What kind of things? She asked quietly. How you'd gradually come to see me as obsolete. How I'd enabled that by not asserting myself more as I aged. How we'd stopped really talking to each other years ago, just going through the motions of a father-daughter, relationship without the substance. Rebecca was silent for a moment. You're right. I did start seeing you as less capable, less relevant, less important. I'm so ashamed of that now. Don't be, I said gently. It's a common pattern between adult children and their aging parents. The difference is that we recognized it and broke it. Not everyone gets that opportunity. As we walked back toward our hotel, I reflected on the journey that had brought us here. From that confrontation at Peterson's restaurant to this national platform where our personal story was helping shape policy and practice around elder financial protection. Rebecca had repaid the $50,000 loan in full last year, ahead of schedule. The boys had graduated college and started their careers, Michael in finance with a specific interest in retirement planning, and Jason in social work, focusing on elder services. Both attributed their career choices to the experiences of the past 3 years. Garrett had become an invaluable part of our advocacy work, using his construction knowledge to develop home modification resources that helped seniors maintain independence safely. And I had found a third act I never expected, traveling the country, speaking about elder financial safety, and mentoring other seniors to become advocates in their own communities. From one moment of betrayal had come all of this. From one moment of clarity, marked by unexpected laughter, had come transformation. You don't need this money anymore, my daughter had said, attempting to take control of my financial independence. She had been wrong about the money, but in a way I could never have anticipated. That moment of crisis had given me something I did need, purpose, meaning, and authentic connection in my final years. Sometimes life's worst moments contain the seeds of its greatest gifts. Sometimes betrayal can lead to breakthrough, and sometimes a simple laugh can be the first step on a journey of profound healing. As Rebecca and I returned to our hotel, I thought about all the seniors across the country who would sleep more securely tonight because of the work we'd done. All the families who would be spared the trauma we had experienced. all the relationships that would remain intact rather than being shattered by financial exploitation. And I knew with certainty that Eleanor would indeed be proud of what we had, built from the wreckage, not just a repaired relationship, but a legacy that would continue long after I was gone. "You don't need this money anymore," my daughter had said, and she'd been right in a way she never intended. What I needed wasn't money. It was meaning, purpose, connection, the opportunity to turn personal pain into public good. Against all odds, her betrayal had given me exactly that.